My bunkie died, bro. The old man who slept right next to me, he died.
All right, good afternoon. This is State of Florida versus Stephen Testa with multiple cases before the court.
What's poppin', man? It's your boy E.I. the King, and this is the Incarceration Podcast, where I talk about prison, pre, post, and present, and how everything that I experienced throughout my incarceration has forever transformed my life. This is the Incarceration. All right, today is part 2 of COVID in prison. And I share with you, man, my entire COVID experience of while I was incarcerated when the pandemic hit. All right, so listen, if you haven't watched the part 1 of COVID in prison, go ahead, stop this video right now. Go back and watch COVID in prison part 1, just so you can go ahead and get caught up and understand like everything that was going on in prison whenever the pandemic hit the nation, and especially when it hit prison, and specifically in the state of Florida in the prison where I was at. So listen, man, as I already mentioned, we all are on quarantine, every single dorm, everybody is on lockdown. And we already heard about a couple people getting sick throughout the pound. We heard people even getting sent to the hospital, but we're only hearing these things. And in prison, you hear stuff all the time, man. There's always rumors, inmate.com is what they call it. You hear everything, everyone's always talking. It's a whole bunch of gossip, you know what I mean? It's just, an isolated city behind the fence. So there's stuff going around every single day, so you hear everything. So whenever we hear about people getting sick and we hear about people going to the hospital, it's one thing to hear it, but then there's another thing to actually see it, or it pops off in your dorm and then it becomes real to you because you witnessed it and you've seen it. So now people are starting to get sick in our dorm. So the prison, what they did, they implemented, and all this is coming from Tallahassee. It's statewide from the state of Florida. It's mandatory. What they're doing is they got nurses coming in every single dorm throughout the entire prison twice a day. I think one was at 6 in the morning, and then another nurse would come in at 5 p.m., 6 p.m. And our nurse would walk around and she would have the little, the thermometer, and she would walk around and, she would take everybody's temperature, or she wouldn't even use a thermometer, I don't think. I think they had the little gun, they just walk up. I don't know, I think different nurses had different things, whatever. But I think for the most part, the nurses had the guns. And I remember because we'd be sleeping at 6 in the morning, they walk by and just, you wake up and they'd be over you with the little freaking, gun, trying to get your temperature. So they would do that twice a day, and if anybody had any high temperature, they quarantining you. They'd take you from the dorm that you were living in, and they would remove you, and they would put you in that dorm that is specifically assigned for the COVID-19 quarantine. So there's people in the dorm getting sick, and it's funny because no one's really talking about it, because one thing about prison that sucks is getting moved. That's literally one of the worst things that can happen in prison, unless you're in a terrible spot, a terrible prison, a terrible dorm, you hate it there, whatever. But for the most part, no matter how savage, no matter how ratchet, no matter how bad the living conditions are, you eventually get comfortable and you get a routine, you get used to the personalities and the people around you. So you just get familiar with your environment. So it sucks that whenever out of nowhere you can just get transferred to another prison, or you can go to confinement, or you can get moved to another dorm for whatever reason, and you got to relearn a whole new environment immediately. It's just survival instinct. You got to immediately just be aware of, you always have to be aware of your surroundings, aware of the people around you, how people move. You immediately classify and you know how to profile everything and everyone around you, because it's a part of survival. It's a part of adapting to different hostile environments. So, that's a part of prison that sucks, especially whenever you're doing years and you got a whole bunch of homies and you're just used to being in a certain spot and having your set schedule and your set routine. So whenever people are getting like these high temperatures and they're being taken from their dorm and they're being put in quarantine, like first of all, nobody wants to leave the dorm that they're in because it's uncomfortable. But also too, like they definitely ain't trying to go to like the COVID quarantine dorm because we already see like on the news, yo, it's pretty serious. People are dying all throughout the nation. We're hearing about people getting sick on the pound, people going to the hospital, and nobody wants to go to that freaking quarantine dorm because, all right, you may have a fever, but do you really got COVID? And if that's where they're putting all the people who do got COVID, you're definitely going to get it when you go over there. So it's funny because people in the dorm are starting to get sick, but nobody wants to tell anybody they're getting sick. They're trying to like eat it. You know what I mean? They ain't talking about it. They'll just be like sleep comatose on their bunks for like 3-4 days, however like long it takes for them to get over it. And then it was funny too because there became like a hack whenever the nurses would come around and take everybody's temperature. If the people who were sick, who really didn't want to be quarantined, and the sad part is nobody's even caring or thinking about the people in the dorm that, okay, if I do got COVID, if I am sick, I don't want to be around everybody who's not sick because I'm going to get them sick as well. But hey, in prison is every man for themselves. Nobody really cares. So even if the people do have COVID and they're sick, man, at the end of the day, man, it's prison. Everybody's only worried about themselves, man. They don't care about the next man. So, hey, they're not going to go ahead and voluntarily be like, yo, take me to quarantine because they don't want to go over there. So what the hack is, people are getting their wash rags. They're going to like the sink, but in cold water under it. And before the nurse comes around and checks their temperature, they're like soaking these cold, wash rags into their forehead, hoping that whenever they run the gun, like the temperature check on their forehead, that their temperature won't be high. The cold water will actually bring it down. And they'll be able to hold it over the head, and that way like they won't get quarantined. So once again, like like COVID really hasn't gotten super serious on the pound yet. People are getting sick, you know what I mean, but they're keeping it to themselves, and no one's like died like in the dorm yet. Like we haven't heard about anybody dying like on the compound yet. Of course, people are trying to escape from quarantine by like putting the cold rags on their head, but for the most part, everybody's still like just trying to survive. Like everybody hates being stuck in the dorm, like with no canteen and no rec, and there's some violence popping off in the dorms, and everybody's got a short fuse because we got freaking cabin fever. Everybody's stuck in the dorm, 24 hours for weeks on end, and it sucks. But the nurses come around, and normally like all the nurses in the chain gang are like women, and they can be a lot of attractive women. So like, all the inmates, all the convicts are trying to holler at the nurses and flirting with them. So everybody's looking forward to when the nurses come around. So it's still kind of like light in spirits, you know what I mean? Like the mood's still good. Like it really hasn't like hit home yet to where this is super serious. But as I mentioned, in episode 1 of COVID in prison, like, it did kind of get like pretty serious when we seen the police come in like hazmat suits. We're like, dang. But that only lasted for like a couple of days because even the police were like, like we're not trying to wear these hazmat suits like all day working. It's super hot, super uncomfortable. So they only wore like the hazmat suits for a couple of days and then they stopped wearing them. All right, now time progresses. And like these little fevers that people are getting, some people are getting these little fevers, but some people are getting hit hard and they're getting like slumped. You know what I mean? They're not eating for like 4 or 5 days and they're just like comatose on their bed. Then I get hit. And, keep in mind too, man, I'm waiting to go to work at least. I'm ready to go home. I'm watching the news, seeing people die. I'm hearing that this COVID-19 is killing people. So of course, man, I'm kind of paranoid, so I get slumped. I get hit for like 3 days, can't leave the rack. Feel like there's a semi truck sitting on my chest, can barely breathe. But I just think it's kind of like me being like a hypochondriac, like, overthinking it. And it's kind of like in my head, but still I was slumped, man, for like 3 days. So now people in the dorm are kind of getting sick for real. And some people are taking it better than others. Some people just got like fevers and really no symptoms. Other people, man, they get slumped for a few days. But my bunkie, man, the guy who sleeps right next to me, he's like mid-50s. But he's already got pre-existing health problems. He, I think, had a few strokes. I don't think there's one. I think he had 1 or 2. I never really spoke to him, honestly, just because he was like an older guy. And he was kind of nasty, you know what I mean? And I guess just being honest, one thing about prison that like did to me is like I hated being around older people because like, I don't know, a lot of elderly people in prison are like nasty, and unless they like been in prison forever and they got old in prison, I'm just being honest, a lot of the elderly people in prison normally have like, sex offenses and like child molestation cases and things like that. Once again, not to condemn, not to hate them, still loving on them with the love of Christ and trying to see them as Jesus does. But a lot of times, like, I didn't have like a lot of like friendships with like elderly people unless they were like already, Christians or involved in the church, or for some reason they were cool, whatever. I just had, for the most part, yeah, I didn't talk to the guy. He was just older guy, kind of nasty, whatever. But then my bunkie, so he gets sick, and there was a guy who slept next to him, a younger guy, and they were from the same city. So this younger guy used to kind of take care of this old guy, you know what I mean? Like give him food and just look out for him, make sure he was good. That's a common thing in the chain gang. Like the elderly people, especially like the ones who don't have sex offenses and all that, and he didn't have one. People look out for him. Like, old school, you straight, you good? Let me know if you need something. Da, da, da. But once again, he wasn't that old. He was only like in his mid 50s, but he moved like an elderly person because of his stroke. You know what I mean? He had a cane. He really couldn't talk that good. He was really overweight. And like I said, he was pretty nasty. So this younger guy from his city used to try to like take care of him and help him out from time to time. So he got sick. You know what I mean? Everybody's getting sick now at this point. And then my bunkie, the old man who sleeps next to me, he gets sick. And I remember one day, like he lived in the TV room. He lived in the day room. He used to always watch sports, watch everything. He just lived in the day room, lived watching TV. So one day, like everybody's like screaming and yelling in the day room. And I think I went out to go get some water or something. I'm seeing what happened. And they're yelling at my bunkie. They're yelling at the old man because I guess he just like pissed. He just pissed on himself he was out there like watching TV. And I'm sure he, obviously didn't mean to. He just like pissed. So everybody's just selling him out, saying how nasty it is, da da da. And the young guy from the city, helped him, like walked him to the shower, made sure he got in the shower, and took the mop and threw bleach down, and mopped up his piss for him and everything, wiped down the bench and all that. So, anyways, the old man was sick, and obviously he was hitting him pretty hard. But then a couple of days after that, he did the same exact thing. And he pissed again in the day room. But this time, like, he didn't even make a big deal about it. He just pissed and just, like, kept watching TV. And that's when people were, like, snapping on him. Like, yo, you're tripping. Like, we know you sick, but still you just can't just, like, piss and just act like it's no big deal, man. So they're just yelling at him, just, like, snapping on the old man. Same thing, you know what I mean? His friend helps him go get in the shower, cleans up his mess behind him. And it gets to the point to where, like, all right, now you can see, like, he's moving slower, he's not eating, so his young homie, tells the nurses when they come through, and they take the old man out. You know what I mean? They quarantine him. But rather than moving him to the quarantine dorm, they take him to medical quarantine, which is more serious. And then we hear in a couple of days that he dies. So this is when like COVID really got serious for me, because it's like, dang, like I personally felt bad because I never shared the gospel with the old man. I never really like went out of my way to like show him. I mean, of course I was nice and respectful, and I give him food every once in a while, but I never really like intentionally like shared the gospel with him or just showed him the love of Christ like I could have. And like that was just like kind of like a wake up call the Lord used for me to like to always be missional and to make sure I'm loving and sharing the gospel with everybody, and share and show the love of Christ to all people. And it was just like a wake up call for me. It was definitely like a life lesson. And but it also too was like a wake up call for like COVID. Like, dang, like, yo, like we hear about people dying on the news. We see it. We hear about people getting sick throughout the compound, people getting moved to the quarantine dorm. But yo, like my bunkie, who literally I could like put out my hand and hit the bunk next to me, like, yo, he's not there anymore. His bunk is empty, and it's because he died. You know what I mean? Like I remember like waking up in the morning, I see his empty bunk, and I would just like really like process it through my mind, like, dang, like old school really died behind COVID. You know what I mean? And like I said too, like I'm waiting to go to work at least at this time. I'm dying to get out of prison and go home. And it's like, dang. So now like my mind's turning about like, yo, when are they gonna start doing transfers again? How long is COVID gonna last? And man, it was just definitely like, like I said before in episode 1, the hardest prison time I ever did in my life, man. It was crazy. So this goes on for months. No rec, no canteen, but slowly but surely, even as the pandemic's, spreading throughout the nation and throughout the globe, things on the compound, people are still getting sick, people are still going to the hospital. We're hearing about a few more deaths. But things kind of like become a new norm, and then even administration begins to like lighten up on the restrictions. Now like dorms can go out one at a time to rec. So that becomes like our new norm, like going to rec like every other day for an hour. So we're dying to go outside. I'm out there running my life away, because I like to run and work out and, play sports and things like that. And we can go to canteen now like every couple of days. So everybody's like stockpiling on canteen to where like the canteen's empty because everybody's buying everything they can because they don't know when they're going back to the store. So man, that went on for months. And then finally, they started opening up the compound again. Like child services started happening and we could start going back to child. But once again, too, it was like one dorm at a time. So it was like months and months, maybe like 3 or 4 months of like just quarantine, like being stuck in the dorm, like no canteen, no rec, no nothing. And then like starting to go to canteen, like every couple of days and the rec every couple of days for a couple months. And then chapel months down the line, and then like call outs months down the line, school months down the line. So it was like, maybe I think about a year process. I don't know if it was a year, maybe 6 to 8 months. It was definitely a long, drawn out process of being completely locked down on quarantine and things slowly opening back up. And just the whole COVID experience, man, in prison was chaos. Like I said, man, they stopped doing transfers for a long time. But thanks be to God, man, when they started doing transfers again, I was one of the first people out of prison, man, going to work at least. Because a lot of people, like these months of quarantine, all the people at work release are going home. So a lot of these work release centers were empty and they need to fill them back up ASAP so the state can start getting half their check, you know what I mean? And of course help the inmate population transition back into society. But for the most part, the state wants their money. So they're trying to fill up these work release centers as fast as they can so they can get half of everybody's check. So they start sending a whole bunch of people to work release, and thanks be to God, man. I get transferred from prison and I make it to work release. So listen, that was my COVID experience while in prison. So once again, man, this is your boy EI the King, and this is the Incarceration Podcast, where I talk about prison, pre, post, and then present, and how everything that I experienced throughout my incarceration has forever changed my life. This is the Incarceration. So listen, man, any questions about COVID while in prison? If you were in prison and you were in there during the pandemic, and if you're at a different prison, whether it be in the state of Florida or throughout the nation, go ahead and drop it in the comments. Let me know how your experience was. If you love this video, man, go ahead, drop some fire emojis, like and subscribe to this channel, turn the notification bell on. And I do have another podcast. It's called Let Me Talk Bro. It's on my official music channel. It's called EI the King. So go ahead and subscribe to that podcast and that channel as well. And what's up, man? Y'all like the home studio here, or you feel like I should go back to the official studio? Let me know. And it's your boy, EI the King.